Let's start with a recap of the story so far. So we have King Solomon in his temple, and he's got the Ark of the Covenant there. Then he has a son by the Queen of Sheba who comes to him, and they bond, but the son wants to return to Ethiopia. So King Solomon says to the son, you go, you take some of my nobleman's children, the next generation down, and continue the good work in Ethiopia as the king of Ethiopia. But the nobleman's children, they don't want to be parted from the Ark of the Covenant. So they make a plan to steal it. And they make a fake one, which they put in the temple. Well, they sneak into the temple and they put the layers of covering on it. And they take away the original. And when they are leaving with all their goods and everything, they are on a platform, well, it seems to be like a platform, that is flying, and they fly off to Egypt, where they cause considerable devastation, and then they get all the way down through Egypt and into Eritrea, and just on the border of Ethiopia, about to enter Ethiopia, and that is when part one of our story ends. And this is the time when King Solomon realizes that the ark is gone. So we will continue our story at that point, because this is where he's trying to catch them. So he's trying to follow their trail and get to them. So now we can start looking at what the ancient texts have to say about this part of the story. So this is what the texts say when they realize that maybe the Ark of the Covenant was stolen. It says, "Woe be unto us if our sons have carried off our Lady, the holy, the heavenly Zion, the tabernacle of the law of God." So this is how they refer to the Ark of the Covenant. So now they decide to check to see if it is missing. And the king asks the priest, "Did you check? Did you see if it's there?" And the priest says, "I did not, Lord. It had 3 coverings over it. And I took off the outermost one and dressed Zion in the covering which thou gave me. And I brought the other one to thee." So it's at this point that we realize that the Ark of the Covenant had 3 protective covers over it. And once it was stolen, it either had no protective cover over it, or it just had the one that King Solomon had given to his son. So hence it was once again quite dangerous. So they go and check, and once they take off the 3 protective covers, they discover that all that's underneath is the fake ark. The story then goes on to say that King Solomon then rose up and commanded the herald to cry out and the soldiers to blow the trumpets, so that the people might go forth and pursue the men of the land of Ethiopia. And if they overtook them, they were to seize his son and bring him back with the tabernacle Zion, and slay all others by the sword. So we know from this passage that King Solomon is very serious about getting back the Ark of the Covenant, and he doesn't want to take any prisoners, but he does want his son back. And King Solomon rose up in wrath and set out to pursue the men of Ethiopia. He sent out mounted horsemen so that they might go ahead of him to find out where they were and return and bring him news of them. The horsemen journeyed on and came to the country of Egypt, where the men of Ethiopia had encamped with their king. At this point, they could in fact be talking about Elephantine Island, or they could be talking about somewhere else that the Ethiopians made camp at. But in my mind, it's probably the area on Elephantine, which is designated where they did camp. So the soldiers on horseback that went ahead of King Solomon started asking the Egyptians questions about the group that had passed through. And they said, "Some days ago, certain men of Ethiopia passed here. They travelled swiftly in wagons like the angels, and they were swifter than the eagles of the heavens. Then the king's soldiers said unto him, How many days ago is it since they left you? The men of Egypt said unto them, This is the 9th day since they left." So King Solomon is either just entering into Egypt, or he's still on his way to Egypt, but the Pharaoh sends a messenger to King Solomon, because he knows that he's coming, with gifts. And this is what the text has to say about that. Solomon the king made haste to question him even before he had presented his gifts and credentials, and said unto him, Hast thou seen men of Ethiopia fleeing by this route? After a bit of explanation regards where the dignitary had been and looked and spoken to, he gave an interesting answer to King Solomon. Not only did he confirm that the Ethiopians had passed this way, but he also said they made an awful lot of noise and they floated like heavenly creatures. So the noise from all these flutes and trumpets and things must have something to do with the technology and how they raise it up into the air. But let us continue with what is said about the Ethiopians as they travel through. Those who were in the cities and towns were witnesses that when these men came into the land of Egypt, our gods and the gods of the king fell down and were dashed into pieces, and the towers of the idols were likewise broken into fragments. And they asked the priests of the gods, the diviners of Egypt, the reason why our gods had fallen down. And they said unto us, The tabernacle of the God of Israel, which came down from heaven, is with them and will abide in their country forever. It is because of this, when they came into the land of Egypt, our gods were broken into fragments. And this sounds like a very good description of what I saw on Elephantine Island. It was like everything had just been shaken and fallen and dropped. And it's considering how close all these things were to where they say that the Ark of the Covenant was hanging out for a little while, it comes as absolutely no surprise whatsoever that it may have caused some of the devastation. Of course, some of this may be from other reasons as well, but it does seem like an interesting coincidence. The next section is really just Solomon lamenting, i.e. crying about the situation, and then trying to rationalize that it's God's will and that sort of thing. So it doesn't really get into anything particularly exciting until it gets to this bit. The angel of God appeared unto him openly, and said unto him, As for thyself, thou shalt build the house of God, and it shall be glory and support for thee. And why is this so interesting? Well, who was this angel? And why was the angel giving King Solomon directions as to, just go back and get on with building a house for God? The texts later go on to state that it was decided that this whole thing was to be kept a big secret, and that they were going to pretend that the Ark of the Covenant was still with them. The texts also go into some of the interesting history around the Ark, which I will talk about in part 3. So keep listening.